final segment. And I don't want to say last segment because, but you're going to
the anchorman. We're bringing home the torch.
You're the anchorman. That's right. That's a good way to look at it. The opening segment will be, Andrea Kelly, one of our political correspondents. She and I are going to go over the fundamentals of explaining what HERF is, how it got started, a little bit of the history. There was a 1 cent sale. There was a 1 cent gasoline tax imposed in 1921. HERF was created in '73, I believe, and it's gone from there. So,
can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Why are you bringing this up now? Because God, if you would have brought this up in January or November, December, January of,
Well, it's part of it is that in the rush of the legislative session, there are just so many things to try to get a handle on, and we just couldn't get to all of them. But and so there are still many of those things that I think remain fairly important. And the other thing is that it's always a juggle. Who's available? Who's not? Last week, for example. I was supposed to have the governor on to talk about the end of the session, why she vetoed this, why she supported that, etc. And on Wednesday morning, her guy called me and said, she's not going to be able to make it. And usually by Wednesdays, I think you and I were first in touch Monday or Tuesday, usually by Wednesdays, my lineup is pretty set. So I'm sitting there at my desk on Wednesday morning with nothing. And this is my tale of woe. Because we work here at the university, I use journalism students as interns to do a lot of my research. And I was without interns last week and this because school's out. School starts again next week for the summer and I get an intern. But so I looked at what interns had prepared for me, and the one thing they had prepared, and it was appropriate last week, was we were starting to get into wildfire season. So I made a bunch of calls, and in fact, by the end of the day, I had to tell 2 people, I can't fit you on because I have too many people. That almost happened this week. In fact, I got a call back last night from the city of Phoenix saying, "Oh, can we still get somebody?" And I said, "I'm pretty booked."
So who's going to be on the show?
It'll be Andrea will start, then I have Ken Strobeck, then Greg Stanley, who's the assistant county manager for Pinal County.
Okay.
And then you. So anchor.
Great.
I'm glad you saw it that way.
Let me tell you a little something how I took up this issue. I became chairman of transportation in December of 2010 after being reelected. In my first legislative session starting in January, I didn't have much of a legislative agenda going into transportation. Just didn't have time to, didn't have a year to kind of set something up. And just went through the motions and just what bills came with me. At the end of the legislative session, but also being on appropriations, I've been looking at these sweeps, and something I've been, quite frankly, many Republicans ran on back in 2008 was about all these sweeps that are happening, K-12 rollovers, university rollovers, the sweeps from private sector industry, self-imposed fees and so forth that we're taking from industry. And many of us ran on a message about not doing this because the Napolitano administration basically racked up about $6 billion in debt. But the HERF sweeps just kind of disappeared. And so as a legislator now, I found my party starting to do the sweeps. And once I gained control of a committee, I said, well, okay, now I can talk about HERF. I'm helping to set policy for transportation. And one thing about the HERF sweeps, it's a large amount of money. It's very identifiable to one area, where a lot of the other sweeps get very convoluted unless you're really a political inside baseball kind of guy, kind of person. It's hard to kind of discuss that with the general public, unless you spend some time studying these budgets. And so started championing that cause, and was reaching out to different organizations and went around the state talking with different entities. And ultimately the language of HB 2271. And I kind of sent you a summary of how it came about was actually written, and I don't publish this too much, but it was written by John Leosados with PAG, our local PAG, and Jim DeGrood with RTA, and kind of just going back and forth over several months and with several different stakeholders, we built this concept that let's see if we can push. We knew that we weren't going to be successful, basically, but we're starting to push that message forward.
At least get the discussion going.
Absolutely. And more than discussion, I mean, get in there and get into some real, more than discussion, okay? I mean, you know, putting some political capital on the line. And what we got, what the concept was, here's a bill that will say that it's okay that the legislature has to sweep from time to time. We understand that. Tough economic choices, we have to fund education, we have to fund our social services, we have to fund corrections in the state. That's 91% of the state budget. But when we take these monies from education, universities, different areas and so forth, they're considered debt, but the HERF money just is no longer considered debt. So what we were trying to do is let's recognize any sweeps from the past and into the future that come from the HERF as a form of debt, okay? And so that way, at some point in time, it would be paid back to the system. It was absolutely fought tooth and nail by my leadership.
Yeah, oh, no question. And that doesn't surprise me at all, because that, and this is my phraseology, but that kind of accountability is something that then becomes part of the record. And I know that's part of what you were trying to do.
And it's both parties.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that...
Well, and it's happened in good times and bad. It hasn't just been since the budget went to...
You're using the very verbiage that I use and so forth. The Democrats did it to support higher levels of spending on education and social services, even though they were unwilling to either go out and tax to do it or shift from other funds or whatever it was. We borrowed it to support those. Republicans got a hold of the legislature back in 2009 with Governor Brewer coming in as our chief executive. And now all of a sudden we were doing this so we didn't have to raise taxes. It's convenient.
Well, and in fact, that's an area, and then we need to go in because they're ready for us.